Hello everyone. So today I'm going to be presenting to you a little talk on education technology implementation. And we have a couple goals for this online module. The first one is just to help make sure that you guys all understand what an implementation strategy is and why it's so important. The second one is to help you be able to recognize some of the key variables, and some of them might be things you've thought of already, but I hope to be able to introduce some other ones that might have been unconsidered so far. But these are variables that are strong predictors of success when running an innovative assignment, and particularly one that uses a kind of technology. And lastly, our goal for this is to have you able to create an implementation strategy document. And so for this part, we'll use your Thorny assignment, and we just have a mini assignment for you that involves creating a strategy document and then also evaluating a strategy document authored by one of your peers. Okay, so what is an implementation strategy? Obviously, it doesn't just apply to education technology. We use this as a way of describing how the techniques and ways for improving the chances of success with any kind of assignment that you're going to be running. Typically, this becomes more important when you're trying to do something that you've never done before. And that could be a new assignment type altogether, but especially when you're using a new piece of technology, maybe one that you've never used in the classroom before or that you've never asked students to use. There are things that you can do to improve the chances that things will go the way that you want them to. I do just want to give you one example of, or a non-technology example of why this can be so important. I'll use a study that we did of the case study method of instruction a couple years ago, and something that I learned that was pretty interesting. So obviously case studies are used in a lot of different schools. Some schools, the case study method is the predominant mode of instruction for the entire program. Take, for example, the business school, MBA programs. In those programs, it can be the case that every class relies on the case study method of instruction. And sometimes students describe that as being, these cases as being incredibly powerful and incredibly useful for them to practice using various skills that they're developing in their programs and learning about big problems that they might be confronting when they graduate and so on. So we wanted to study a little bit about what makes them so great when they go well. And a small group of us went up to the Harvard Business School to observe cases being taught there. They're kind of the grandfather organization for the case study method. And I was very lucky because I was able to watch the same case study being taught in two different ways in two different classes. In the first class, the instructor came out and had absolute command over the room. He was able to ask very good questions and be very provocative with how he introduced the materials. He created a nice kind of tension in the room. He ended up putting some students on the spot, but overall the experience, that intensity seemed to be great on the learning side. Students were very engaged. They were very thoughtful in their responses. They were very, their answers were very carefully worded, and they all just took it very seriously. And obviously, as he probed deeper with his questions, the students were going deeper into the case and really getting a sense of what the key problematics were and so on. By the time it was over, I think everyone felt kind of exhausted. It was an hour and a half long class using this one case. Later in the afternoon, we watched another class use the same case, and very surprisingly, things didn't go nearly as well. The instructor seemed to have a hard time getting students to really engage with the material at the same level as we saw in the first class. Students seemed to struggle with some of the concepts and even content within the case itself. Now, the interesting thing is, these cases are all huge investments that the school makes. Some of these cases took, 3,000 hours of research and work to create. Some of them are they cost tens of thousands of dollars just to be able to use. So it was very interesting that this content, this object of study, and in a lot of ways a good case study is like a tool, it was interesting that this tool had such different results in these different courses within the same school and being used by the same kinds of students. So um, that leads to this idea of a strategy for making sure that regardless of what your content is and what your assignment consists of, that things can go as well as possible. If we look at a course here in this slide, you can see there's a certain duration of time. This could be a semester-long course. This could be a weekend workshop. And then along the way, you have these assignments. And a key point to make here is that it's frequently held that the technology, the object of study, by itself doesn't have any inherent instructional or educational value. This is a prevailing belief, especially in education technology circles. Sometimes faculty have the assumption that there's something about the tool that they've chosen to use on its own that will help them achieve the teaching and learning objectives of the course. And we would say that usually that's just not the case, that you could have the perfect tool for the perfect class, but if it's not used in a way that's conducive to accomplishing the teaching and learning goals, then you might not have the success that you're hoping for. And I think that's what we ended up seeing a little bit at the business school. It was the same case, but the way that it was used resulted in wildly different outcomes. So what are the implications about that for us? Well, we have to look at the courses we're teaching from almost a design point of view. We have to be able to consider at what point we're going to be introducing this innovative assignment and recognize that there's time leading up to it. Obviously, there are things that occur during the implementation of the assignment itself, but then also trailing out from it on the other side. And all of those things together will create this context in which the assignment's being run, and that context will really have a large role in how successful it is overall. So what can we do to improve the chances of our assignments being successful? Well, this is where this implementation strategy really comes into play. So what is this strategy? It's really a plan, and it can include steps that you've identified ahead of time to take to ensure that things go as well as possible. And part of being able to do that is in recognizing the different things that could go wrong, and maybe said in a different way, recognizing the key variables that might raise red flags for you. And these red flags are things that should not discourage you from running any kind of assignment, any kind of innovative assignment using technology, but they're things that you need to plan for. You need to recognize them and plan for them ahead of time in order to come up with techniques to make sure that they're addressed in some way. So what I'm going to do now is introduce to you a kind of strategy that we take when we're looking at implementing technology in the classroom. There are lots of variables that come into play here. And what we've done, and some of this is taken from the literature too, and we'll be sharing that with you, is group the variables into four main categories that they seem to fall into. And those categories are variables that have to do with the teacher. And so back to the Harvard Business School case, we would say that there were a lot of variables there that could have been paid attention to help things go better in that second class where things didn't go very well. The next variable is the assignment itself. And so in our case, this is the innovation. So what are the things about the innovation that we have to pay most attention to make sure it goes well? And then we have the student, of course. And then we have this context. And the context here can be the entire school. It could be just the department that you're teaching within, or even a particular program that the course you're teaching falls inside of. We would say that that presents a context in which this assignment is taking place. Okay, so I'm going to go into each one of these main variables, these four big variables, and introduce a couple sub-variables within each, and maybe give you some examples along the way. And just as we get started here, what we're going to do is identify some of the positive aspects of these variables, and also highlight some of the negative ones. And it's those negative ones that are the red flags for us. So you should be thinking about things that can occur that would reduce the negative impact of those red flags as we go through these variables. And I'll remind you again as we go through. So the first one here under the teacher is the pre-existing technology knowledge that that instructor has. Does the technology fall within their current abilities and understanding of the technology itself? Or are they looking to use something that they're quite unfamiliar with? It can be the case that and I said this earlier, that the technology they've chosen is the right one for the job they're trying to do. But if they don't have a deep understanding of how it works and what it is, and a comfort and a confidence about its use, then students can see that and they can sense that, and that can cause some attitudinal things. It can cause them to question, why should we have to learn this if our instructor doesn't seem to know how to use, whatever the thing is. Let's say it's a blogging software or a simulation. The students will feel like they're being asked to do something that the instructor themselves is not doing, and why should they have to do that? Okay, so the next one here is the compatibility with technology, and this one's actually much more interesting than the first one. So compatibility here, we're talking about pedagogical compatibility. Does this assignment and the technology fall in line with the instructor's pedagogical beliefs? If the instructor, for example, it teaches in a very constructivist way, has used collaborative assignments in the past and has created that kind of culture in the classroom, well, then when they introduce a tool that really excels in those things, we would say the compatibility with their chosen education technology is quite high with their pedagogical approach to teaching the course. Now, it's sometimes the case that an overriding pedagogical belief that an instructor might have is that for their course, the lecture format is superior. And in many cases, that's completely true. It is superior. The thing to pay a lot of attention to, though, is let's say that for 7 straight weeks, the instructor's using lecture, and students get into a routine of coming in and taking good notes and asking good questions and so on. And then all of a sudden in week 8, they introduce a tool that really requires true collaborative work, maybe it's project-based work using technology to help facilitate that process. If that's the case, and there was nothing done to lead up to it, then we would say that the compatibility there isn't so high between the pedagogical approach that the instructor's taken to the course overall and the technology that they've chosen for running this new assignment. And so we would want to come up with ways of mitigating that incompatibility a little bit. Okay, and the last one here, it's quite simple. It's just how familiar the instructor is with the resources that exist around campus. Have they used various media in their classroom before? Have they used different technologies before? Are they familiar with the AV staff? Do they have a relationship with the groups that can support their teaching efforts and so on? Are they aware of groups like ours, mine, for example, CCMTL? If not, if they've never used those resources, they've never had someone walk them through using their projector, they've never built those relationships with those support groups, then if they only begin to do that the day of the assignment, then you improve the chances that things might not go very well. If there is a problem, who do they reach out to first and so on? Whose responsibility is it? If they haven't identified those things ahead of time, then we would expect that there might be some trouble there. Okay, the next one has to do with the assignment, the innovation. And these variables are also pretty interesting. So the first one here is distance from school culture. This has to do with whether or not the culture of the school in which this course is being taught it matches well with the assignment that's being used. If, for example, this school, in a lot of courses that students take, they have a lot of project work, they have a lot of kind of group work or things like that, more of constructionist or constructivist teaching, then if the assignment that the instructor's asking students to complete also falls within that kind of culture, that collaborative culture, then we would say the distance is short, and that should make us feel pretty good. Now, if in that school there's a predominant pedagogical approach, let's take the business school again, for example, where the approach relies very heavily on the case study method. If in that one class that the instructor is teaching, they decide to create an assignment that is wildly different from that traditional culture that's in place, then we would say that there's a chance that students might be confused. It might kind of throw them for a loop, even if the assignment's a great one. If it's quite far removed from the culture of the school they're in, then we would say that things might need to be done ahead of time to ensure that students have a smooth transition into this new kind of assignment. The next one here is distance from resources. Does the technology that you're asking students to use, and does the technology that you are using in this class already exist, or is it easily obtainable, and is it reliable? If so, then we would say the distance is very short. Now, if you're asking students to use a tool that you've never used before, that they might have to go out and purchase, for example, or install on their own computers, for example, if they haven't been tested very well, if it's something that's very new for everybody, then we would say the distance there is quite great. And the greater, again, that distance is, the more chances there are that things might not go the way that you're hoping they do. Okay, and the last variable here is the distance from current practice. This has to do with the teaching practice in this course. So has a version of this assignment been run before? Or is this the first time that anything like this has been tried in this class? If the use of technology here is an addition to something that's been tried in the past, and we would say that the distance is shorter and that things are a little bit safer. You could look at this new innovation as being an iteration on a pre-existing assignment. If nothing like this assignment has ever been run before, we would say the distance from current practice is quite great. And what that means is that there are things in there that need a lot of attention to make sure that things go well. Okay, the next variable is the operator. These are pretty self-explanatory. The technology skills that the student brings already, how comfortable are they with particular technologies? If, for example, you're asking them to do an assignment that requires creating, let's say it's a video project, have they used video editing software in the past? If so, then you're probably in pretty good shape for running an innovative assignment like that. If those skills don't exist, then as part of your assignment, what you'll have to do is build in some kind of mechanism for them to come up to speed on those things. And to the degree you're able to do that, the students will be more comfortable. They'll have a more seamless experience, running this innovative assignment that you've designed. The next one here is project style experience. How far removed from other assignments is your assignment from their experience? In other words, let's take the video editing example again. Have they ever done anything like that? Let's say technology independent. Have they ever been asked to create that kind of a multimedia presentation before? Have they worked on projects of that kind before? Or have most of the students in your course only sat in lectures and taken notes, and they've never been asked to do something more creative, more collaborative, and so on. So that's an important variable, because if you get the sense, and maybe within your particular school you already know that it's the case that most students come in having never done something very innovative, or never having been asked to do something very creative or innovative on the assignment side, then what you would want to do is build in some mini assignments leading up to the one that you're hoping they're able to accomplish, to help give them some of that experience, so that they can have more of a seamless transition to this innovation. And the last variable here has to do with their beliefs and attitudes. We all teach very different kinds of students, different age groups, different professional backgrounds, and so on. And it can sometimes be the case that we're teaching a room full of people who do not see the value of technology in education. If that turns out to be the case in any of your teaching situations, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be running education technology connected assignments. It just means that you have to be aware of how they might view those things and be prepared to explain very well and very carefully why it is that you're asking them to use this tool for this assignment. And to the degree to which you're able to do that convincingly, the students will be more comfortable and more apt to dive deeply into what you're asking them to do. Okay, and the last variable here is the context. So again, this has to do with the school or the department or the program in which your course is being taught. What kind of organizational support exists in your school? Let's say just on the teaching side, is there a strong teaching culture in place in the school that you're teaching your class in? Is your dean, is your administration engaged in the idea of being innovative, trying new technologies? Are they interested in having more faculty using those things? If so, then those are important variables to take into consideration. If they're not, let's say that where you're teaching, there's kind of an old guard in place, and they still question the value of using progressive education methods. Then when you go to run your assignment, you know that you will have a lot of convincing to do, and you know that you might not get the support that you need to make that assignment go as well as possible. And again, that doesn't mean not to do it, it just means being aware of those things will help you improve your chances of being successful with it in the long run. So who are the people in the organization who can help you? What's the human infrastructure like? Do groups like CCMTL exist in your school? If they do, making sure you've built a relationship with them, you understand what kinds of services and resources they offer, all of that stuff would be very important, and so on. And the last one here, the very last variable overall, has to do with the technology infrastructure. This is actually one of the first variables whenever I do workshops on implementation strategy. This is the first one that people suggest is the most important one. And in a lot of ways it is. It's also just the most obvious one. So do the classrooms have internet connectivity? If you're going to be using a web-based tool in the classroom, does the machinery in that room support what you're trying to do? You need to make sure that those things are tested out ahead of time. You need to make sure that you're connected to the people who can help troubleshoot if things do go wrong, and so on. So at Columbia, for example, we have some schools where the technology infrastructure is very fantastic. So this is the journalism school, the School of Social Work, the business school. I mean, they have smart classrooms. They have lecture halls that have all the camera gear are already set up and stuff like that. Then we have other schools like the English department, sociology, and so on, where even East Asian studies, where it can be tricky just to get a Wi-Fi connection. And so understanding that infrastructure, where the gaps are, and so on, will be really important if you're going to be running an innovative assignment using technology. Okay, so I'm going to give you all of those variables in the form of a table, and the table has a description of some of the positive things, so things that you won't have to worry about, and then also some of the negative things. These are the red flags that might apply to aspects of the thorny assignment that you guys are working on. So what we're going to ask you to do is first find a link to the PDF version of that table and go over it again and familiarize yourself with it and make sure that all those variable categories are pretty well understood. And next, you're going to consider which of those variables apply to your specific assignment that you'll be running this fall. And then lastly, we're asking that you draft a short implementation strategy document. The length will vary depending on how many red flags you've identified for what you're trying to do. For some of you, it will only be a couple things that you've realized you're going to have to take extra steps to mitigate chances that those variables will negatively affect what you're trying to do. And for some of you, you might end up with a whole bunch of them because you're going to be doing something that's really new in a lot of different ways, and there are a lot of different things that could go wrong. So that document will basically be consist of the following. It'll just be a quick identification of the red flags that you've identified, and then a plan to address each one of those red flags. So for each variable that seems like it could pose a problem, what steps can you take or might you take to mitigate those problems? And we're going to ask you to put those in your blogs. And then once everyone's had a chance to do that, and we'll set some deadlines for those things, it'll be in the Canvas site. Then what we'll do is we'll have people review each other's strategy documents just to give feedback on it. Were you able to notice things that were left out accidentally? Does it seem like the person's plan to address those negative variables is pretty solid, or are there yet other things that might go wrong that seem unaccounted for, and so on. That'll be the exercise that we do, and then we'll kick off the next live session when we all get together in person with a little bit of debriefing about these strategy documents. Okay, so good luck with it. It'll be fine, and we will continue this in person.